Welcome to Boring History for Relaxing channel. Tonight we settle into the frozen sleeping places of 19th century Arctic explorers, where the night is long, the breath turns white, and the bed is less a cosy retreat than a small negotiation with death. You stand beneath a sky so dark and clear it looks polished, while the snow squeaks under your boots like it is complaining about your life choices. Somewhere beyond the tent, the ice groans in a deep, slow voice. And yes, you probably won't survive this if you treat bedtime like a weekend nap on a sofa. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell us where you are watching from and what your local time is, because it is oddly comforting to know someone is warm somewhere. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the place where you are supposed to sleep, though the word sleep feels almost too generous. In warmer parts of the world, sleep is a soft surrender. Here, it is a procedure. You do not simply lie down. You prepare, inspect, brush, thaw, wrap, tighten, loosen. Breathe carefully, and hope that your eyelashes do not decide to become architectural features. The cold is not just around you, it presses itself into every object. It waits in the folds of canvas, in the seams of mittens, in the iron of a buckle, in the stiff leather of a boot. It has patience, which is deeply unfair, because you are tired and would prefer nature to respect your bedtime. By the 19th century, British, American, Scandinavian and other European expeditions have pushed again and again into Arctic waters, searching for passages, coastlines, magnetic data, lost crews, whales, glory, or some combination of all the above. One mainstream historical fact settles quietly beneath this whole scene. Many expeditions, including those searching for the Northwest Passage, spent entire winters locked in sea ice, with ships held fast like insects in amber. When the sun disappears for weeks or months, your body keeps asking ordinary questions in an extraordinary place. Is it night? Is it morning? Why is my blanket crunchy? Who designed this planet? You reach the tent, or perhaps the snowbank sheltering it, and the first task is to keep the sleeping place from becoming worse. Worse is a broad category. Worse can mean drifted snow inside the entrance. Worse can mean a frozen flap that refuses to open. Worse can mean a man who has spilled something sticky near the bedding, which in this cold becomes less a spill and more a permanent geological deposit. You brush snow away before it can melt from body heat and later freeze again. You stamp your feet, but not too carelessly, because every movement has a cost. Sweat is dangerous. Too much exertion before lying down can dampen your clothing, and dampness in this world behaves like a traitor with excellent timing. The temperature may fall far below anything your hometown thermometer was built to describe. Some explorers recorded readings so low that ink thickened, metal burned the skin, and breath froze into crystals around bedding. The air inside a tent can still be bitter enough to sting the nose, even with several bodies packed together like badly arranged luggage. You learn that warmth is not one thing, it is a series of small defences: a dry sock, a covered ear, a sleeping bag shaken free of frost, a mug of something hot, a companion who does not accidentally kick open the tent flap in the night, which is the kind of social failure that should be discussed at length, preferably in a courtroom made of ice. You crouch near your bedding and begin the ritual of removing only what must be removed. This is not a place for elegant nightclothes. Nobody is putting on a delicate cap and reading poetry beside a cheerful lamp, unless the poetry is about numb toes and mild regret. Some men sleep partly dressed, sometimes heavily dressed, because undressing can lose too much heat, and dressing again in frozen clothing at morning can be a punishment composed by a very imaginative villain. Yet sleeping in too many layers can trap moisture and leave you chilled later. So you balance discomfort against danger, which is basically the Arctic method for everything, including breakfast. Historians still argue whether some expedition leaders understood the cold as a practical problem to be adapted to, or as a moral test to be endured with discipline, stiff collars, and a suspicious amount of optimism. That argument matters because attitude shapes bedtime. If you believe cold is an enemy to study, you copy local methods, change your clothing, adjust your shelters, and admit that your usual habits may be ridiculous. If you believe cold is a challenge to character, you may keep doing uncomfortable things while describing them as noble. The Arctic, being rude but honest, does not care whether your suffering has a nice title. You notice the little sounds of the camp settling down. Canvas flutters. A rope tightens with a dry twitch. Someone coughs into wool. Someone mutters about a bootlace. The snow outside hisses lightly as wind combs across it. In the distance, the ice cracks with a report like a cannon muffled by sleep. That sound is common enough in frozen seas, but it still feels personal, as though the entire polar world has just turned over in bed and found you annoying. A quirky tidbit drifts in with the frost. Some explorers woke to find their blankets, beards, or tent interiors coated with delicate ice from frozen breath, making the inside of a sleeping place sparkle like a fairy palace designed by someone with no concern for comfort. It looks magical, which is lovely, until you remember the magic is made from moisture leaving your body and becoming tiny knives of cold decoration. The Arctic can make even poor ventilation look festive, very tasteful, completely hostile. Before lying down, you check your extremities, because the cold prefers the edges of you. Fingers, toes, nose, cheeks, and ears need attention. You flex them. You rub them gently. You make sure no tight strap is slowing the blood. A boot that is too tight can become a small, private disaster. A mitten lost in darkness can start a chain of events that no one wants in the expedition diary. You learn to be fussy. Fussy keeps you alive. Fussy says, perhaps I should not leave my socks where they will freeze into boards. Fussy says, perhaps I should not place bare skin on metal. Fussy is not glamorous, but neither is losing the argument with a brass buckle. The tent smells of wool, smoke, leather, stale food, and human beings who have spent too long in clothing that cannot be washed properly. This is not a luxury hotel, unless the hotel has 1 star, and that star is Polaris. You lower yourself onto the bedding, careful not to drag snow inside. The surface beneath you may be boards, packed snow, a ground cloth, skins, or whatever the party can manage. The goal is to separate your body from the frozen earth or ice, because the cold below is greedy. It steals heat silently and efficiently, like a pickpocket with a scientific education. You tuck yourself in slowly. There is no casual sprawl here. Limbs are arranged for warmth. Knees bend, shoulders curl, hands find safer places near the body. Your breath must not soak the bedding too much, yet your face cannot be fully exposed for long. The darkness presses close. You hear the others settling, one by one, into their own cocoons of fabric, fur, and stubbornness. Someone whispers a final comment that might be a prayer, a complaint, or a joke about dinner. In the Arctic, those categories sometimes overlap. At last, you become still. This is the strange part. The whole day has been labour against cold, and now survival asks you to stop moving. You listen to your body making its small heat. You feel warmth gather slowly where fabric traps it, where breath lingers, where another sleeper shifts nearby. Outside, the wind continues its patient inspection. Inside, you make yourself smaller, quieter, less available to the night. Sleep does not arrive like comfort. It creeps in cautiously, as if it too is wearing frozen boots. You draw your coat closer around your ribs and begin the private ceremony of becoming almost impossible to bend. In the 19th century Arctic, clothing is not decoration, not fashion, and certainly not comfort in the cheerful modern sense. Clothing is portable shelter. It is a wall you wear. It is also heavy, scratchy, smoky, greasy, and frequently shaped as though designed by someone who had heard rumours of the human body but never met one. You do not dress for elegance here. You dress so the cold has to fill out paperwork before reaching your skin. Closest to you, there may be flannel or wool, because wool remains useful even when damp, at least compared with cotton, which turns into a chilly betrayal wrapped around your bones. Wool traps little pockets of air, and those pockets become precious. You learn to think of air as something that can be stored, guarded, and carried. A loose layer can warm you better than a tight one, which feels unfair if you have spent your life believing that snug means safe. In this place, tightness can squeeze warmth away. Tightness can stop circulation. Tightness can turn a heroic expedition member into a shivering parcel with opinions. 19th century explorers often wore layers of woolen underclothing, shirts, waistcoats, heavy trousers, outer coats, mittens, caps, comforters, and boots, adjusting them according to duty, weather, and available supplies. A mainstream historical fact settles into your sleeves. British naval expeditions brought standardized clothing and bedding from the Royal Navy world, but many crews discovered that ordinary European garments struggled badly in deep polar cold. A fine naval uniform might impress people at a dockyard. It does not impress a polar gale. The gale does not salute. The gale simply finds the gap under your collar and moves in like it has signed a lease. You pull on another layer, perhaps a thick wool jersey, perhaps a fur garment acquired through trade, adaptation, or necessity. The order matters. The texture matters. The dryness matters most of all. Every garment carries a tiny climate inside it. If you dress too warmly while hauling gear, you sweat. If you sweat, the dampness cools later. If it cools while you are lying still, your bed becomes a cold accountant adding up every mistake you made during the day. So you learn to vent yourself like a stove, open a collar, loosen a scarf, remove mittens for a moment, then regret it immediately. Because the Arctic has excellent reflexes. Your hands disappear into mittens rather than fingered gloves whenever possible. Fingers warm each other when they share a chamber, like exhausted tenants in a tiny boarding house. Gloves allow better work, yes, but they separate the fingers into lonely little rooms. That is useful for tying knots and terrible for staying warm. Some explorers used wool gloves inside larger mittens, or fur mittens over liners, creating a layered defense that made delicate tasks nearly comedic. Try fastening a small button with hands shaped like bread loaves. Go on. The cold will wait and laugh quietly. Around your neck goes a scarf or comforter, thick enough to soften the place where wind loves to enter. Your head is covered with a cap, perhaps wool, perhaps fur, perhaps a hood attached to an outer garment. A great deal of heat can be lost from an uncovered head, especially when the rest of you is wrapped like cargo. You pull fabric over your ears, because ears are dramatic little structures and will complain early. The nose is harder. You can cover it, but breath dampens cloth. Damp cloth freezes. Then you are wearing a small, icy monument on your face, which is not dignified, although by now, dignity is somewhere in a crate under the biscuits. Historians still argue whether European explorers resisted Inuit clothing because of cultural pride, supply habits, or simple misunderstanding of how radically different Arctic travel was from cold weather at home. It is not that every outsider ignored local knowledge all the time. Some learned, borrowed, traded, and praised what worked. But many expeditions were slow to accept that a loose fur parka, skin boots, and layered garments shaped by generations of Arctic experience could outperform heavy wool coats during certain kinds of travel. There is a lesson here, murmuring under the snow. When people who live in a place have already solved a problem, maybe do not arrive with brass buttons and confidence as your main technology. Your boots are their own little empire of concern. They must protect the feet from snow, ice, wetness, and pressure. Leather boots can become stiff as boards. If they get wet, they may freeze into a shape your feet strongly disagree with. Some parties used moccasins or skin boots, often with layers of socks, grass, felt, or other insulating material. A quirky tidbit pads softly into the scene. In some Arctic traditions, dried grass or similar natural fibres could be tucked into footwear for insulation and moisture control. A humble foot nest that might outperform something much more official looking. Imagine surviving the polar night partly because your boot has become a tiny hayloft. History is rarely as majestic as paintings suggest. At bedtime, these layers become complicated. You want enough clothing to stay warm, but not so much that you crush the insulation of your sleeping bag or wake soaked with sweat. You sit awkwardly, tugging at sleeves, loosening a waistband, checking stockings. The simplest movements feel ceremonial because your clothing resists everything. You turn your head and the collar turns half a second later, like it is considering the request. You bend to check a sock and your coat bunches behind you with the confidence of a furniture cushion. Anyone watching might think you are wrestling a wardrobe and losing politely. The smell of the garments surrounds you. Wool holds smoke. Fur holds animal scent. Leather holds oil and salt. Flannel holds the long memory of tired men. Nothing smells fresh for very long. Even cold, which seems clean from a distance, cannot erase the human reality of weeks inside layers. You become used to it. Everyone does. The nose negotiates peace. A man who complains too much about smell in an Arctic camp is basically announcing that he has spare energy, and someone will find a shovel for him. You slide a hand beneath your outer layer and feel the inner warmth that has gathered there. It is not the pleasant warmth of a fireplace. It is smaller, earned, slightly damp at the edges, but it is yours. Your body is making it. Your clothing is holding it. For all its awkwardness, the bulky pile of wool, fur, hide, scarf, cap, liner, mitten, stocking and boot is doing something extraordinary. It is creating a livable pocket between your skin and the world that would happily freeze a cup of tea before you could complain about the taste. You settle more deeply into your bedding, dressed not for sleep as you once imagined it, but for survival disguised as rest. The layers creak and whisper as you curl inward. A sleeve scratches your wrist. A scarf tickles your chin. One mitten has migrated somewhere inconvenient. Still, warmth gathers slowly in the folds. The cold remains outside the cloth, pressing, testing, patient. You answer it with wool, fur, and stubborn human heat, wrapped around you like awkward armour. You ease yourself toward the sleeping bag, and it waits for you, like a narrow cave with a personality. In ordinary life, a bed invites. In the Arctic, bedding negotiates. It may be stiff from cold, rimed with frost, heavy with old breath, and shaped by the memory of whoever last crawled out of it at a deeply unreasonable hour. You do not flop into it. Flopping is for people with fireplaces, clean sheets, and the illusion that the universe is supportive. You lower yourself carefully, because a sleeping bag here is not just bedding. It is equipment, shelter, storage, and occasionally a fragrant reminder that warmth often arrives wearing an animal's smell. Many 19th century Arctic travellers used sleeping bags made from skins, wool blankets, or combinations of both. Reindeer skin was prized because hollow hairs trap insulating air, making it remarkably warm for its weight. Buffalo robes, sealskin, bearskin, and layered wool blankets also appear in expedition accounts, depending on region, supply, and luck. A mainstream historical fact rests quietly beneath your shoulder blades. Reindeer skin sleeping bags became especially associated with polar sledging because they could help conserve warmth during travel over ice, when every pound mattered and every night outside the ship tested the body. You learn to respect reindeer very quickly. It is difficult not to admire an animal that continues helping people sleep even after having a rather unfortunate day itself. The bag may be arranged with the fur inward, outward, or in layered ways depending on design and conditions. Fur against the body can feel wonderfully warm at first, though moisture from breath and sweat becomes a constant problem. If the hairs ice up or flatten, insulation suffers. If the skin gets damp, it may stiffen. If it freezes into an awkward crease, that crease will locate your hip with the accuracy of a tax collector. You shift, inch by inch, trying to create a hollow for your knees and shoulders. There is no starfish position. There is barely a punctuation mark position. You curl, tuck, and become a comma in a sentence written by winter. The opening is the great vulnerability. Warmth escapes from the top, and cold air pours in around the neck like an unwelcome guest with excellent manners and terrible intentions. You pull drawstrings, fold flaps, tuck scarves, and shape the entrance around your face. You want breathing room, but you do not want to breathe warm vapour into the bag. That vapour condenses, condensation freezes, frozen moisture steals insulation. So you keep your mouth near the opening, turning slightly so your breath drifts away. It is a tiny act, almost delicate, and also absurd. You are lying inside a bundle of skins in a frozen wilderness, trying to aim your breathing like a polite chimney. Some sleeping bags are shared, especially during sledging journeys, because shared body heat can mean the difference between rest and misery. But shared bedding is not romantic in this context. It is elbows, boots, damp socks, and someone breathing exactly where you hoped there would be silence. You discover that warmth has a social cost. A companion shifts and pulls the edge away from your shoulder. Another companion's knee becomes a geological pressure point. Someone whispers that he cannot feel his toes. Someone else says he can feel them, unfortunately. Sleep becomes a group project, and as with many group projects, one person is definitely doing more complaining than necessary. Historians still argue whether the best 19th century sleeping systems were those designed by naval supply departments, those adapted from indigenous Arctic practice, or those improvised through painful experience once official plans met actual weather. The answer depends on expedition, route, season, and purpose. A ship trapped in ice could store bulky bedding. A sledging party dragging everything by man-haul or dog team needed lighter, tougher, more efficient arrangements. A design that worked inside a cabin might fail on open sea ice. A fur bag that saved your life at night could become heavy if it gathered frost day after day. The Arctic enjoys making every solution temporary. Very thoughtful of it, in the way a locked door is thoughtful because it teaches patience. You push your feet deeper into the bag, where the lower end is already cold. Feet are difficult tenants. They arrive chilled, demand warmth, and contribute very little at first. Some travellers placed spare clothing near the foot end or tucked small items inside the bag to keep them from freezing solid. It is not only you that needs warmth. Ink, instruments, medicine, food, and damp mittens may all compete for space. A sleeping bag can become a crowded little cupboard. There is nothing quite like drifting towards sleep with a pair of socks, a notebook, and perhaps a lump of ration tucked nearby like strange bed companions. Modern luxury has mattresses with memory foam. You have reindeer skin with memory of yesterday's foot odour. A quirky tidbit settles beside you. Some polar travellers learned that shaking or beating frost from sleeping bags in the morning mattered almost as much as crawling into them at night. Frost built up from breath and body moisture, and if ignored, it could add weight and reduce warmth. So the bag had to be dried, aired, scraped, brushed, or simply abused in the cold daylight. Imagine your bed needing to be beaten like a carpet because you dared to breathe in it. The Arctic does not merely make chores harder, it invents new ones with a straight face inside the bag. The first minutes are not comfortable. They are a test of faith. Your body heats the space slowly. The skins or blankets feel cold against outer clothing. Your knees complain. Your shoulder finds a ridge. The bag smells of animal hide, smoke, and the long, private history of tired sleepers. You remind yourself that smell is not the enemy. Cold is the enemy. Smell is just the enemy's weird cousin visiting for the season. Gradually, warmth begins to gather. Not all at once, not generously, but in patches, around your thighs, along your chest, under your arms. The bag becomes less like an object and more like a climate. You learn not to waste motion. Every adjustment opens a channel for cold air. Every unnecessary stretch risks disturbing the precious warm pocket that has formed around you. So you become still, deliberately still, with the discipline of someone guarding a candle in a storm. Beyond the fabric and skin, the tent mutters. The snow shifts. The wind presses against the walls, but inside the sleeping bag you are reduced to small sensations. The scratch of wool under your chin, the slow warming of toes, the damp edge where breath has frosted near the opening, the sleepy awareness that if you roll too far, you may drag the cold side of the bag against your back and ruin everything. This is bedtime as strategy. At last, your body accepts the bargain. The bag is narrow, sour, heavy and imperfect, but it holds back enough of the night. Enough is the sacred word here. Not comfort, not ease. Enough. You close your eyes inside your layered den of hide and wool, while your breath ghosts into darkness and the cold waits patiently outside, unable for the moment to come all the way in. The shelter above you is thin enough to seem insulting. Canvas, stitched seams, poles, guy lines, pegs, snow blocks, and human hope form the little room where you are expected to pass the night. You look at it from inside and understand at once that the tent is not stopping the Arctic. It is merely slowing the Arctic down, making it wait at the doorway like a guest who has not been invited but has brought wind. The walls tremble and pulse in the darkness. The fabric snaps softly, then sharply, then softly again, as if the weather is practicing different tones of disapproval. A 19th century polar tent is usually simple because every object must be carried, dragged, packed, dried, repaired, and cursed at least once. Heavy canvas can resist wind, but it weighs too much on a sledge. Lighter fabric is easier to move, but it flaps and strains. Poles can snap, pegs can loosen. Lines can freeze into knots so solid they seem to have made a personal decision. A mainstream historical fact rests in the tightness of the ropes. Sledging parties on Arctic expeditions often relied on portable canvas tents, sometimes supported by poles or oars, with snow piled around the edges to reduce drafts and help anchor the shelter. The snow, which spends most of the day trying to defeat you, is suddenly hired as building material. Very convenient, very suspicious. You crawl inside through a low opening, because heat rises and doors are thieves. A small entrance helps keep warmth from escaping, though it also requires you to enter with the grace of a tired seal. The first person in brushes away loose snow. The next person drags in bedding. Someone secures the flap. Someone mutters that the wind has shifted, which is the Arctic version of hearing that the restaurant has run out of soup. Plans change. Everyone sighs. No one is surprised. The tent floor may be nothing more than a cloth laid over snow or ice, perhaps with skins, blankets, spare clothing or equipment beneath you for insulation. If there is no proper barrier, the cold rises with slow confidence. It does not rush, it seeps. It moves through cloth, through padding, through the careless spaces beneath hips and shoulders. You learn that the floor matters as much as the roof. A beautiful tent above a frozen bed below is still a cold sandwich, and you are the filling. Outside, men build snow walls when conditions allow. They cut blocks, stack them around the windward side, bank snow over the tent skirts, and shape little barriers against drifting. Snow is strange that way. Loose snow can bury you. Packed snow can protect you. The same material arrives as enemy. Blanket, wall, and chore. You press your mitten to the tent edge and feel where the draft slips through. Then you shove snow against it from outside, or ask someone else to do it. Because leadership sometimes means pointing at a problem while pretending your fingers are still fully available. In severe conditions, explorers used more solid shelters when they could. Snow huts, stone huts, canvas roofs over low walls, depots, observatory sheds, and shipboard structures all appear in different accounts. The classic snow house, often associated with Inuit knowledge, is especially clever because snow contains trapped air, making it a surprisingly effective insulator when shaped properly. European explorers did not always master it quickly. Historians still argue whether failures to adopt snow house building came mostly from cultural pride, lack of training, time pressure, or the difficulty of learning a skilled technique under miserable conditions. It is easy to praise a snow house from a warm chair. It is harder to cut and place blocks correctly while the wind is exfoliating your face. A quirky tidbit settles into the quiet. Some explorers found that a well-made snow shelter could feel warmer than a tent. Not because it was truly warm in the cozy parlour sense, but because it blocked wind so well that the air inside became calm. Calm air is a treasure. Wind steals warmth by replacing the little warmed layer around your body again and again. Stop the wind, and suddenly the cold seems less like an attacker and more like a gloomy roommate. Still unpleasant, but less athletic. Inside the tent, the roof slowly gathers frost from breathing. It forms delicate crystals that shine in lamplight, if there is lamplight, and drift down when the fabric shakes. You may wake with frost sprinkled on your bedding like sugar on a cake baked by a villain. The beauty is real. The annoyance is also real. Every exhale changes the shelter. Every body warms and wets the air. Every frozen surface remembers. You try not to touch the sides, because brushing the canvas may send a tiny snowfall onto your neck. Nothing encourages philosophical humility like being attacked by your own ceiling. The tent is crowded, of course. Everything useful wants to be inside. Men, bags, boots, mittens, instruments, food, lamp, stove, and perhaps a cooking pot all compete for space. The shelter becomes a puzzle assembled by people who cannot feel their fingertips. You place the most needed objects where they can be found in the dark. You keep boots from freezing into lumps when possible. You keep sharp tools away from fabric, because tearing the tent wall at night would be a bold way to become unpopular. You avoid kicking over the lamp, which is generally considered polite. A tent in the wind has moods. Sometimes it bellies inward, pressing against shoulders as though the night itself is leaning on you. Sometimes it lifts and snaps, making the whole structure jump. Sometimes snow rasps along the outside in a dry whisper that almost soothes you, until you remember it may also be covering the entrance. Someone must occasionally check that the shelter is not being buried. This is a grim little bedtime thought. While you sleep, the landscape may rearrange itself over your door. Nature, apparently, enjoys tucking people in too firmly. Still, the shelter creates a boundary, and boundaries matter. The inside smells of bodies, wool, oil, and damp canvas. The outside smells of nothing, clean and enormous and cold enough to erase personality. Inside, a person can whisper. Outside, the wind answers in a language made entirely of pressure. Inside, you can cup your hands, adjust your scarf, listen to breathing, and believe for a few hours that the world has walls. That belief is not childish. It is practical. A mind sleeps better when it knows where the edge is. You lie there while the tent shivers overhead. The poles creak. The lines hum faintly. Snow presses against the lower walls, sealing gaps and making the little room feel buried and held at once. The shelter is poor, temporary, draughty, and magnificent. It gives you no comfort worth boasting about, yet it gives you enough darkness without wind, enough space without sky, enough stillness for warmth to collect around human bodies. Beneath canvas and snow, you let your breath slow, while the vast frozen night tests every seam and, for the moment, fails to take the whole room. You lie within the wooden body of the ship, and the ship lies within the ice, and the ice lies under the dark sky like a locked door. It is strange to sleep aboard a vessel that no longer moves. A ship is supposed to creak because of waves, lean under sail, and answer the sea with ropes and canvas. Here, it creaks because cold tightens every plank and beam. It shifts because pressure from the ice squeezes the hull with slow, patient force. The ship has become a house, a prison, a warehouse, a workshop, and a bedroom, all wedged into the same frozen sentence. Below decks, the air is thick with closeness. You descend into a world of low beams, stacked supplies, hanging clothes, lantern smoke, damp wool, and breath. Space is a luxury, and like most luxuries in the Arctic, it has been left behind somewhere warmer. Hammocks may be slung where there is room, bunks may be built against bulkheads. Officers often sleep in small cabins, though small is doing heroic work as a word. Sailors sleep packed near one another, with sea chests, blankets, boots, and personal scraps of comfort tucked into narrow claims of space. A mainstream historical fact settles into the dimness. Many 19th century Arctic expeditions wintered aboard their ships when ice trapped them, turning naval vessels into stationary winter quarters for months at a time. This sounds stable until you remember that your bedroom can be crushed by geography. The deck above is often covered, banked, or insulated as best the crew can manage. Snow may be piled around parts of the ship to cut the wind. A housing or awning can be built over the upper deck, creating a protected working area. Down below, partitions may be lined with felt, canvas, or other materials to hold warmth. Yet the cold finds the ship's ribs. It creeps through iron fastenings, around ports, through hatchways, and along the damp surfaces where warm interior air meets frozen wood. You touch a wall and feel the chill hiding behind it. The vessel is shelter, yes, but it is not a warm home. It is a wooden compromise. Sleeping in a bunk aboard an icebound ship is different from sleeping in a tent. There is more structure, more routine, and more human noise. You hear coughs, snores, boots on ladder steps, the scrape of a chair, the clink of a mug, the faint scratch of someone writing in a journal by poor light. Somewhere a man turns over and makes the bunk boards complain. Somewhere another man mutters in a dream. You begin to understand that privacy has gone ashore and is not expected back until spring. Even your thoughts must squeeze sideways through the crowd. The bedding may include blankets, rugs, skins, or issued naval bedding, but dampness is constant. Warm air rises, touches cold surfaces, condenses, then freezes or drips depending on the place and temperature. The deck beams may sweat, frost may gather in corners, blankets may feel clammy near the edges. The smell below decks becomes its own weather system: coal smoke, lamp oil, preserved food, stale bedding, tar, leather, bilge, and many men trying very hard not to become unbearable company. It is not pleasant. It is familiar. Familiarity, in a long polar winter, can pass for comfort if you lower your standards until they are lying flat on the floor. Historians still argue whether shipboard wintering preserved morale better than field camps because of routine and shelter, or whether the cramped quarters intensified illness, boredom, and social strain. You can feel both truths pressing around you. The ship gives walls, stores, tools, a galley, medical supplies, and a chain of command. It also gives everyone nowhere to escape. A cheerful man becomes loudly cheerful. A gloomy man becomes contagious. A man who whistles the same tune may become a greater danger to expedition harmony than the weather. This is not in the official charts, but it should be. At bedtime, the ship settles into ritual. Watches are assigned. Fires or stoves are managed carefully. Lamps are lowered or extinguished. Wet garments hang where they can, though drying anything properly is a slow and uncertain miracle. Boots are placed where they might not freeze too badly. Men climb into hammocks or bunks wearing more clothing than anyone would choose at home. In a hammock, your body curves with the canvas, wrapped and suspended, while the cold air pools beneath and around you. In a bunk, you may have a narrow shelf, a mattress or padding of some kind, and just enough room to regret the architecture. A quirky tidbit drifts through the berth deck. In some wintering ships, crews organise theatrical performances, newspapers, lectures, or other entertainments to fight the mental weight of darkness and confinement. That means your bedroom might also be near the place where someone recently performed a comic song in costume made from spare material. The Arctic is trying to freeze you, and Mr. Jenkins has decided morale depends on amateur theatre. To be fair, he may be right. Nothing says survival like applauding a man in a ridiculous hat while frost forms near the ceiling. You pull your blanket up and listen to the hull. The ice outside is not silent. It groans, cracks, pops, and grinds. Sometimes it sounds distant, like thunder under the floor. Sometimes it sounds close enough to be a decision. The ship responds with creaks and knocks. You know that ice pressure can damage or destroy vessels. Many polar ships were strengthened for ice, with reinforced bows and stout timbers. But no wooden ship is stronger than the Arctic forever. You sleep inside something brave and breakable. That thought is not soothing. So naturally, your mind brings it to you at bedtime like a helpful little tray. Still, the ship has advantages. There is a galley where hot food can be made. There are stores below. There may be a stove warming the common spaces, though unevenly. There are routines of cleaning, exercise, observation, prayer, reading, repairs, and watchkeeping. Routine is a blanket for the mind. It tells you what happens next when the sun refuses to help. You know when you are expected to rise. You know who tends the fire. You know whose turn it is to grumble about the air. Predictability becomes its own little lamp. Your breath slows. The bunk is hard. The blanket heavy. The air stale. And the cold presses through the timbers with quiet insistence. Yet compared with the open ice, this is almost luxury, which is a sentence that would alarm anyone living indoors with carpets. You feel the ship holding you, not gently, not warmly, but stubbornly. Around you, other sleepers settle into the same wooden shelter, each tucked into a narrow pocket of fatigue. The ice grips the hull. The night grips the ice. Inside, you drift beneath beams and frost, while the ship keeps its long, creaking watch. You become aware of another shoulder near your own, another set of knees folded in the dark, another person trying to disappear into warmth without accidentally stealing yours. In the freezing Arctic, solitude sounds poetic until the temperature drops low enough to make poetry look foolish. Bodies produce heat, and heat is too valuable to let manners waste it. So you lie close to other men, not because it is comfortable, and not because anyone has planned a charming sleepover, but because the cold outside has made personal space seem like a luxury item imported from a softer planet. In camp, sleeping close together can make a real difference. A small tent warms more easily when several bodies share it. A shared sleeping bag or closely packed bedding traps heat better than isolated arrangements. Even on a ship, berths placed near one another and crowded mess spaces can hold a little more warmth than empty compartments. A mainstream historical fact settles into the closeness. 19th century Arctic sledging parties often slept in cramped tents with men packed side by side, partly to conserve heat and partly because small tents were easier to carry across the ice. The tent does not care about your elbows. The sledge does not care about your dignity. Weight decides the architecture, and the architecture decides where your neighbour's boot ends up. You ease your arm into a place that is not quite comfortable, but does not jab anyone in the ribs. This is the polar art of compromise. A hand may need to rest near your chest for warmth, but another sleeper's sleeve occupies the same territory. Your knees want to bend, but the man beside you has already claimed the best angle. Someone's cap brushes your cheek. Someone's breath warms the air for a moment, then dampens it, because even useful companionship arrives with side effects. You learn that heat shared by humans is never pure. It comes with whispers, odours, twitches, coughing, and the occasional apology that is not sincere enough. The darkness makes the crowd feel larger. You hear every small human sound amplified by stillness. A throat clears. A blanket scrapes. A nose whistles faintly, achieving the impressive tone of a tiny broken flute. Someone sighs as though he has personally been disappointed by the North Pole. Another man begins to snore, not violently, just steadily, like a saw working through damp wood in another room. There is no other room. That is the difficulty. You are in the room. Everyone is in the room. The snore has become public property. Privacy changes shape in such places. It does not vanish entirely, but it becomes internal. You keep your thoughts private because nothing else is. Your sleeping face is shared with the tent. Your complaints are shared with the bunk room. Your cold feet may become someone else's immediate problem. In ordinary housing, people close doors. Here, they close their eyes and hope that counts. A man who wishes to scratch, shift, mutter, pray, or quietly despair must do so with an audience of half-sleeping witnesses. The Arctic is very good at group bonding, mainly because it removes all exits. Historians still argue whether closeness in polar expeditions strengthened comradeship or made tensions sharper by giving everyone too little space for too long. You can feel the answer change with the hour. At dusk, closeness may feel reassuring. Near midnight, when one man has rolled onto part of your bedding and another has developed a cough with theatrical timing, brotherhood thins slightly. By morning, when everyone has survived, it thickens again. Companionship in the cold is like a rough wool blanket. It scratches, smells, and saves you anyway. There are practical rules, spoken or unspoken. Do not bring loose snow into the sleeping space. Do not kick the lamp. Do not open the flap unless necessary. Do not shake frost from your clothing onto another man's face unless you are prepared for a conversation featuring strong feelings. Keep your boots in order. Keep weapons, knives, pipes and tools where they will not injure someone during a sleepy turn. If sharing a bag, enter carefully, because one clumsy movement can drag cold air inside and ruin the warm pocket everyone has been patiently building. Nothing says friendship like a chorus of exhausted men hissing at you because your knee made a draft. A quirky tidbit nestles into the bedding. Some explorers wrote with dry humour about the extreme intimacy of sledging life, where men might sleep so closely packed that turning over had to be done in coordinated fashion, like a very cold dance performed by people who would rather not be touched. Imagine announcing, in a whisper, that you intend to roll left. Now imagine 3 others negotiating the treaty. It is not elegant, but neither is freezing in a heroic pose because you are too polite to move. Shared warmth also depends on trust. You trust that the person beside you has fastened the tent properly. You trust that the watchkeeper will notice bad weather. You trust that no one will mistake the inside of the shelter for a place to practice energetic boot repair at bedtime. Trust becomes physical. It is not only about bravery in grand moments, it is about whether someone remembers to close the flap quickly. It is about whether someone admits his socks are wet before they chill everyone nearby. It is about whether a tired man can still be considerate when his fingers ache and his patience has gone somewhere south for the winter. On ships, the crowd has different rhythms. Hammocks swing or hang in rows. Bunks line the walls. Men may sleep in shifts, with watches rotating through the night. The closeness is less about piling into one bag and more about living in a wooden hive. Heat from stoves, bodies and lamps circulates unevenly. Some spots are coveted, others are dreaded. The man near a draft knows exactly where the draft begins. The man near a warmth may pretend not to notice his good fortune, which fools nobody. Social hierarchy, rank, health, duty and luck all shape where a body rests. You feel the human warmth around you slowly change the air. Not warm, exactly, but less cruel. A tent with bodies inside has a different silence from an empty one. It breathes. It smells alive. It contains little movements, little irritations, little evidence that you are not alone under the polar sky. This matters more than pride admits. Fear grows easily in wide darkness. Beside another sleeper, fear has to make room for annoyance. And annoyance, oddly enough, can be comforting. It is hard to feel completely abandoned while someone nearby is snoring like a small, damaged bellows. You settle your cheek into the rough edge of your bedding and let the shared stillness gather. A knee presses lightly against yours. A shoulder warms the narrow strip of air between bodies. Someone whispers one last complaint about the cold, as if the cold might take notes and improve. It will not. Still, the complaint makes a few men breathe out something almost like laughter. The sound is quiet, brief, and heavily wrapped in wool. Then the tent grows calmer. Bodies stop negotiating. The warm pocket steadies. Outside, the wind keeps moving across the ice, wide and empty and indifferent. Inside, you are cramped, inconvenienced, faintly offended, and warmer than you would be alone. That is the bargain. Not graceful, not private, not remotely fresh-smelling, but alive. And for a long Arctic night, alive is a very respectable form of comfort. You listen for the small sounds of heat being made on purpose. In the Arctic, warmth does not simply happen. It is summoned, fed, guarded, and suspected of leaving at any moment. A stove ticks in the dimness. A lamp trembles. A kettle gives a tired little murmur. Flame is precious here, but it is also dangerous, needy, smoky, and always asking for fuel. You cannot just say, "Lovely, fire," and go to sleep. Fire must be watched like an unruly child holding a candle near the curtains. Except the curtains are the tent, the ship, your bedding, and possibly your entire future. On an icebound ship, stoves are among the most important pieces of equipment for winter life. They heat common areas, help prepare food and drink, dry clothing when conditions allow, and offer that deep human comfort of seeing something glow. Coal may be burned aboard ships when stores permit. On sledging journeys, smaller cooking arrangements might use spirit fuel, alcohol lamps, oil, or other portable systems. A mainstream historical fact settles into the faint warmth near your hands. Polar expeditions depended heavily on managed fuel supplies, because heat, cooking, and melting snow for water all required fuel in a place where there were no forests waiting politely outside. The Arctic gives you ice in abundance, but to drink it, you must first spend precious heat turning it into water. That feels like being charged rent by a snowbank. You huddle near the stove or lamp before lying down, careful not to crowd it too closely. Too far away, you freeze. Too near, you scorch wool, soften boot leather, or create smoke that makes everyone cough and glare. The heat is uneven. One side of you warms while the other remains cold enough to write a complaint. You rotate slightly, like a very tired joint of meat, trying to let each part of your body have a turn. Nobody looks dignified doing this. Fortunately, dignity has been missing for weeks and is presumed comfortable elsewhere. In a tent, the heating problem becomes more delicate. A stove or lamp can warm the air enough to cook food or thaw a little snow, but it also consumes oxygen and produces fumes. Ventilation is necessary, yet ventilation lets in cold air. Because the Arctic enjoys jokes with consequences, you leave a small opening or manage the shelter carefully, trying to avoid the invisible danger of bad air. Carbon monoxide, though not always understood in the modern sense by every traveller, was a real threat wherever combustion happened in confined spaces. You do not need to see poison for it to be ambitious. It can sit quietly in the tent, while everyone congratulates the stove for being useful. Historians still argue whether some expedition disasters were worsened by failures of technology, failures of judgment, or failures to adapt heating and ventilation practices to polar conditions. The discussion can become technical, touching on stove designs, fuel quality, ship modifications, clothing, diet, and discipline. For you, lying near the dim glow, the debate becomes simpler. How do you stay warm enough without setting fire to anything, choking on smoke, wasting fuel, or waking to find the water pot frozen solid? It is a modest question, really. Only your life is attached to it. The smell of heat in the cold is unforgettable. Coal smoke has a gritty, mineral thickness. Oil lamps smell sharp and fatty. Blubber, when used in indigenous lamps or adopted in certain contexts, carries a rich animal odour that clings to clothing and hair. Spirit fuel can smell cleaner, though it still has that nervous little flare of danger. A quirky tidbit flickers into the lamplight. Inuit kulik lamps, traditionally fueled with sea mammal oil and fitted with moss or similar wicks, could provide light, heat, and cooking power in a snow house, showing how carefully local technologies match the environment. A lamp like that is not just a lamp, it is a household system shaped by patience. Meanwhile, your expedition stove is over here smoking like it has opinions about the ventilation. You watch someone tend the flame with slow care. Fuel is added, trimmed, measured, or shielded. Nothing is wasted. The warmth that enters the shelter has travelled a long way, carried as coal in a hold, as oil in a cask, as spirit in a tin, as blubber from an animal, as labour in human hands. Every flicker represents planning. Every cup of hot tea has a supply chain behind it, and that supply chain is probably frozen, dented, and being argued over by men with cracked lips. Before sleep, hot drinks become part of the ritual, not because they magically heat you forever, but because they warm the mouth, throat, and hands. They lift morale. They give you something to hold. A mug can become a little hearth for the fingers. You cradle it and feel the steam dampen your face, which is pleasant for 5 seconds and then, naturally, becomes another moisture problem. The Arctic gives with one mitten and takes with the other. Drying clothing near a stove is both necessary and treacherous. Socks, mittens, and inner garments must be dried whenever possible, because damp fabric steals warmth, yet too much heat can shrink, stiffen, scorch, or ruin materials. A mitten dropped too close to the fire may survive as a cautionary tale. Boots placed unwisely may warp. Fur can be damaged. Wool can singe and smell like regret. Someone always thinks he has found the perfect drying spot. Someone is often wrong. The resulting odour is educational. On the ship, the stove creates social gravity. Men gather near warmth without admitting they are gathering. One pretends to adjust a sleeve, another claims to inspect a chart, a third simply stands there with the honest expression of a man who has been cold since October and is not leaving. Rank and routine may regulate who belongs where, but heat has its own politics. The warmest place in a compartment can become a quiet battlefield of elbows, timing, and innocent faces. At bedtime, the fire may be damped down, watched, or kept under controlled use depending on the setting. Too much flame while men sleep is risky. Too little means deeper cold. You feel the change when the heat fades. The air seems to harden. The edges of the room or tent sharpen. Breath becomes more visible. The bedding must now take over from the stove, holding what warmth your body can make. Flame has done its part, briefly. Like a visiting official who gives a speech and leaves before the real work begins. You settle down with the memory of heat still on your palms. Somewhere nearby, metal clicks as it cools. A lamp lowers to a dull bead of light. Smoke thins, then lingers in the fabric and wool. The cold presses closer again, but not completely. There is hot liquid inside you, a warmed patch in the air. A pair of socks, perhaps a little drier than they were. These are small victories, almost laughably small, unless you are the one trying to sleep. Then they are enormous. You curl into the remaining warmth, while the last faint glow watches the darkness with one tired eye. You begin to understand that the cold is only half the problem. The other half is wetness, quiet, clingy, and far too proud of itself. A person imagines the Arctic as dry because everything is frozen, but this is one of those ideas that sounds sensible until your cuffs are stiff, your socks are damp, your bedding smells like a cellar, and your breath has turned the inside of your shelter into a glittering inconvenience. Water is everywhere here. It is locked in snow, floating in breath, hiding in sweat, frosting on canvas, softening leather, and waiting for the smallest bit of warmth so it can become trouble in a new form. You learn to fear damp clothing with the seriousness other people reserve for wolves. A dry garment traps air and holds warmth. A wet garment conducts heat away and chills the body. Even wool, useful as it is, becomes heavier and less pleasant when soaked. Cotton, when used in the wrong place, can be especially miserable because it holds moisture and cools quickly. A mainstream historical fact settles into the clammy fabric at your wrists. Polar explorers had to manage moisture constantly because sweat and condensation could reduce insulation and increase the risk of dangerous chilling during rest. The Arctic does not merely punish mistakes, it preserves them overnight. During the day, you try not to sweat. This feels ridiculous because you are freezing, but hauling sledges, chopping ice, carrying stores, raising canvas, or climbing over pressure ridges can warm you suddenly beneath heavy clothing. Your back grows damp, your shirt clings. A line of sweat forms under your cap. For a brief moment you feel almost too warm, which seems like a nice problem until you stop moving. Then the dampness cools, the heat vanishes, your clothing becomes a cold hand pressed against your skin. Congratulations, you have created your own refrigerator, and you are inside it, so you regulate yourself with almost fussy care. You open your collar during labour. You loosen outer layers. You remove mittens for work, then put them back quickly before your fingers complain in capital letters. You avoid rushing when possible, because haste makes sweat, sweat makes damp, damp makes cold, and cold makes everyone philosophically annoying. This is not laziness, this is survival by careful pacing. Of course, if someone from home saw you stopping in a blizzard to adjust a scarf by 1 inch, they might think you were being delicate. They would be wrong. You are conducting advanced thermal management while dressed like a laundry pile. At night, condensation becomes the enemy that shares your shelter. Warm breath rises and meets cold canvas, wood, or snow. Moisture forms as frost, droplets, or icy crust. The roof above may sparkle beautifully, which is a rude aesthetic choice under the circumstances. If the tent wall shakes, frost falls. If the cabin warms, frozen moisture may melt and drip. If bedding touches a cold surface, it may become wet along the edge. Everything is connected through water, air, and regret. Historians still argue whether some 19th century expedition journals underplayed moisture as a cause of suffering, because cold made for more dramatic storytelling, while dampness seemed too ordinary, too domestic, almost too embarrassing. Yet damp is often what makes the cold enter deeply. It is not the grand polar gale that always defeats comfort. Sometimes it is the wet sock, the clammy cuff, the sleeve that never dried, the blanket edge that froze where breath touched it. History loves heroic paintings of men facing the ice. It offers fewer portraits of someone staring bitterly at a damp mitten. This is unfair, because the mitten may have been the true villain. You sit inside the shelter and examine your clothing by touch. Sight is not always useful in dim light, and ice can disguise itself. You feel the cuffs, the stockings, the inside of boots. You search for damp patches. The smallest wetness matters. A sock that feels merely cool may be dangerous by morning. A shirt damp at the back may chill you when you lie still. You decide what can be dried near heat, what must be worn dry by body warmth, and what is beyond hope for now. The beyond hope pile is never good for morale, but it is very honest. Boots are especially troublesome. Snow melts against warm leather or cloth, seeps into seams, and refreezes. A boot dried too quickly near a stove can crack or harden. A boot not dried at all can become a frozen container shaped like yesterday's discomfort. Some travellers removed inner socks or liners and kept them close to the body overnight so they would not freeze solid. This sounds unpleasant because it is. You may tuck damp socks under clothing or inside bedding, letting your own heat do the slow work. The reward is not luxury. The reward is putting on socks that are merely unpleasant, rather than socks that have become too small boards. A quirky tidbit slides in with the frost. Some Arctic travellers used their own body heat to keep small items, including damp mittens, socks, or even ink bottles, from freezing overnight. Your sleeping space becomes less a bed and more a rescue shelter for objects with poor circulation. You curl around your own equipment like a brooding hen with a very cold nest. Somewhere in the darkness, a man may be sleeping with socks against his chest and pretending this is a normal life choice. It is not normal. But it is practical. And in the Arctic, practical beats normal so thoroughly that normal stops attending meetings. Inside a ship, wetness gathers in different ways. Men come below with snow on boots and clothing. Cooking releases steam. Stoves warm the air unevenly. Breath from a crowded berth deck adds moisture hour after hour. Cold surfaces become wet or frosted. Bedding grows stale. Ventilation helps, but fresh air is brutally cold, so everyone negotiates with discomfort. Too little ventilation and the air becomes foul and damp. Too much and the cold pours in with the confidence of an unpaid bill collector. You begin to treat drying as a nightly discipline. Clothes are shaken, brushed, hung, turned, checked, and sometimes slept with. Snow is removed before it can melt. Frost is knocked from fabric. Bedding is aired when possible, though the word aired is almost funny when the air itself seems hostile. Every dry patch is protected. Every damp patch is watched. You develop an intimacy with textiles that no one asked for. You know which mitten dries slowly, which sock holds moisture at the heel, which seam freezes first. This is what adventure becomes when the paintings stop posing. The body itself must be managed gently. Too much covering over the face traps breath and dampens fabric. Too little leaves skin exposed. You angle your mouth toward an opening, breathe slowly, and try not to create a cloud inside your own bedding. Your breath sounds loud in the small space. Each exhale is warmth leaving you. Each inhale is cold entering, softened slightly by scarf, hood, or shared air. Breathing is no longer automatic background music. It is a tiny weather event. You settle into the bedding, knowing that dryness is a fragile kind of wealth. Your outer garments may be stiff, your socks only half rescued, your blanket carrying the memory of frozen breath. Yet you have brushed away loose snow, kept the worst damp from your skin, and tucked precious dry layers where they can work. The cold presses near, but wetness has not fully betrayed you tonight. That is enough to make the narrow space feel almost safe. You grow still, guarding warmth and dryness together. Our frost gathers quietly above like a pale garden, blooming from every breath. You lie very still and listen to the far edge of yourself. That is where the cold likes to begin. It does not announce itself with drama at first. It starts as a sting, then a dullness, then a strange absence, as though a toe has quietly left the expedition without permission. You flex your feet inside the bedding. You press your fingers against your palms. You wrinkle your nose beneath the scarf. Every small movement is a report from the borders of the body, and tonight, the borders need watching. Frostbite is one of the great night fears of Arctic sleep, because sleep asks the body to be still, while the cold rewards stillness with theft. Fingers, toes, ears, cheeks, and the tip of the nose are most exposed or most distant from the body's warm centre. Blood flow slows in the cold as the body protects vital organs, which is sensible, if slightly rude to the toes. A mainstream historical fact settles into the ache beneath your socks. 19th-century Arctic expedition accounts frequently mention frostbite and frozen extremities as common hazards during travel, watchkeeping, and sleep in extreme cold. The explorers may have written about magnetic observations and coastlines, but the body kept its own diary in numb patches. Before settling fully, you check each vulnerable place with patient care. You loosen anything that bites into the skin. A tight boot, tight stocking, tight glove, or tight strap can reduce circulation and turn cold into injury. This feels almost unfair, because tight clothing seems as though it should keep warmth in. The Arctic, however, enjoys correcting assumptions. A snug band around the ankle may make the foot colder. A mitten cord wrapped too firmly around the wrist can become a tiny enemy with excellent manners. So you adjust, tug, ease, and mutter. Survival sometimes looks like being very particular about a sock. You rub your hands together, not violently, but enough to wake them. If skin has become pale, waxy, or numb, Rough rubbing can damage tissue, though explorers did not always understand the details in modern terms. They learned by pain, observation, and unpleasant experience. You tuck hands under armpits or against the belly, using the body's central warmth as a quiet rescue station. Toes are harder to rescue. They sit far away, stubbornly cold in the foot end of the sleeping bag, like guests who arrived late and refuse to mingle. The nose is a special nuisance. It sticks out into the air with complete confidence and very little insulation. You can cover it with cloth, but breath dampens the covering, and damp cloth freezes. You can leave it uncovered, but then the tip begins to sting. You try a compromise, arranging fabric near the face without sealing in too much moisture. The arrangement lasts 7 minutes, then it slips, freezes, scratches, or becomes annoying in a way too small to mention but too large to ignore. There is no perfect solution. There is only tonight's least foolish one. Historians still argue whether some frostbite injuries on 19th century expeditions resulted mainly from inadequate clothing, poor shelter, exhaustion, nutritional weakness, or commanders pushing men too hard in dangerous weather. The debate matters because frostbite is rarely caused by cold alone. It is cold plus fatigue, cold plus dampness, cold plus hunger, cold plus bad timing, cold plus someone deciding the march should continue because the map looks close to finishing. On paper, a route is a line. On the ice, it is feet, fingers, wind, and the terrible mathematics of exposure. You think of the men assigned to night watches. Someone must monitor the ship, the weather, the stove, the dogs, the ice, or the camp. Someone must leave bedding and step into a world that has been waiting with teeth. Watchkeeping in polar cold is a discipline of motion and attention. Stand too still, and the cold climbs into the boots. Work too hard, and sweat becomes another danger. A watchman may stamp, swing arms, flex fingers, and check his face for numb spots. He may return below with lashes crusted white and cheeks burning. Then he has to warm gradually, not recklessly, because even heat must be handled with respect. The Arctic makes moderation sound like wisdom, and also like punishment. A quirky tidbit arrives with a frozen wink. Some polar travellers watched each other's faces for pale patches, because a man might not feel his own frostbite beginning. Imagine needing a companion to say, with calm seriousness, that your nose appears to be turning into a candle. It is helpful, yes, but not flattering. In such conditions, friendship includes staring at one another's cheeks and announcing suspicious colours. The social customs of the polar night are not found in polite drawing rooms, which is probably for the best. Inside the shelter, you feel along the edges of your hood and collar. A small gap near the ear can create a focused stream of cold air. A bit of exposed wrist can ache until it steals attention from everything else. You adjust the bedding so it does not compress your feet. Insulation works best when it is lofty, when air can remain trapped. If the end of the bag presses tight around the toes, warmth suffers. You pull back slightly, creating space. Your feet still complain, but now their complaint has less evidence. You do not want to fall asleep with any part of you numb. Pain is unpleasant, but numbness is more suspicious. Pain at least writes letters. Numbness stops corresponding. So you wait. You flex toes one by one, or as close to one by one as thick socks allow. You curl fingers. You move your jaw beneath the scarf. You lift the shoulders once, then settle them. These tiny motions are not restlessness. They are patrols. The borders of the body must be visited, so they remember they belong to you. On ships, frostbite can still happen indoors, especially in poorly heated areas, near drafts, during duties on deck, or when wet clothing chills the skin. The cabin may feel safer than the ice, but safety is unevenly distributed. A bunk near a cold bulkhead may punish the sleeper along one side. A hammock near a hatch may swing in a stream of freezing air. A man recovering from illness may struggle to keep warm even under blankets. The body's defences depend on food, health, circulation, and morale. Even courage, annoyingly, does not warm toes directly. Courage is nice. Dry socks are better. You remember that some explorers used oils, grease, or protective coverings on exposed skin, while others relied on face cloths, hoods, and vigilance. Grease might reduce wind exposure, although it could also collect grime and discomforts. Fur hoods, when shaped well, create a pocket of calmer air around the face. This is one reason Arctic clothing traditions valued hoods so highly. They do not simply cover the head, they shape a little climate before the mouth and cheeks. A good hood is architecture. A bad hood is a floppy suggestion. Your body slowly steadies. The toes are not warm, exactly, but they are present. Your fingers tingle with returning feeling, which is both reassuring and mildly unpleasant, like tiny bells being rung under the nails. Your nose remains dramatic, but covered enough. You are tired now in a heavy way, the kind of tired that makes even fear soften at the edges. Still, some part of the mind stays posted like a sleepy guard. The cold waits for carelessness. You answer with small habits. Loosen, tuck, flex, check, breathe, feel. The rhythm becomes almost soothing. Outside, the polar night keeps its enormous silence. Inside, you protect the little points of yourself, those fragile endings of the body that make work, walking, eating, writing, and living possible. At last you let your eyes close, not because the danger is gone, but because everything that can be checked has been checked, and the warmth you have gathered must now be trusted to hold until waking. You hold the bowl or mug close, letting its warmth spread into your fingers before it ever reaches your mouth. Food before sleep is not a small pleasure here. It is fuel in the most literal sense, a quiet loading of the body's stove before the long hours of stillness. In the Arctic, bedtime hunger is not romantic. It does not sharpen the mind into noble thoughts. It makes the cold feel larger, makes the bedding less friendly, and turns every draught into a personal insult. So you eat, even when tired, even when the food is repetitive, even when your jaw would rather resign. The evening meal is dense, heavy, and practical. It may include preserved meat, salt pork, pea soup, ship biscuit, cocoa, tea, coffee, oatmeal, pemmican, or whatever the stores and circumstances allow. Fat matters enormously because it carries energy, and energy becomes heat. A mainstream historical fact settles into the steam rising from the pot. 19th century Arctic expeditions relied heavily on preserved foods such as salted meat, tinned goods, biscuits, and pemmican, with sledging parties especially valuing compact, high-calorie rations. No one is plating a delicate salad with a thoughtful drizzle of dressing. A lettuce leaf would take one look at the weather and become an emotional support object. You lift a spoonful of something thick and salty. It warms the tongue, then the throat, then the chest, in a slow path that feels almost ceremonial. The warmth will not last forever, but the calories will work through the night. Digestion itself produces heat, and a full belly can help the body resist cold during sleep. Yet too much food at once can sit heavily, and poor food can cause its own miseries. The body wants rich fuel, but it also wants variety, vitamins, freshness, and mercy. Expedition food often supplies the first and neglects the others, which is very on brand for human planning in extreme places. Ship biscuit is one of the regular companions. Hard, dry, and stubborn. It is less a bread than a small edible challenge. You may soak it in tea, soup, or fat to make it manageable. If it is infested or stale, you inspect it with the calm of someone whose standards have been dragged across sea ice for months. At home, you might reject a biscuit for being slightly overbaked. Here, you tap it against a cup, consider whether it might outlast the ship, and eat it anyway. The Arctic makes philosophers of everyone, especially around carbohydrates. Pemmican deserves its reputation. Made from dried meat, pounded and mixed with fat, sometimes with berries depending on tradition and supply, it offers concentrated energy in a form useful for travel. It is not always beloved by those new to it, but it works. You chew slowly and feel the grease coat your mouth. It is food designed for survival, not applause. A quirky tidbit settles near the cooking pot. Some explorers and travellers developed very strong opinions about pemmican, praising it as life-saving, while also complaining about its taste, texture, or monotony, with the intensity usually reserved for politics and family inheritance. Nothing brings out literary talent like eating the same dense ration in the dark for the 100th time. Hot drinks become nearly sacred. Tea is more than tea. Cocoa is more than cocoa. They are warmth, routine, comfort, and a reason to gather. A mug gives the hands a job and the mouth something familiar to do. Sweetened drinks provide quick energy when sugar is available. The smell of tea or cocoa can soften a tent, even if only briefly, and remind the mind that civilization once existed and may, in theory, still be available somewhere beyond the ice. You sip carefully, because burning your tongue in the Arctic would be such a petty injury that it feels almost insulting. Imagine surviving storms only to be defeated by impatient cocoa. No thank you. Historians still argue whether some polar crews suffered more from insufficient calories, vitamin deficiency, poor food preservation, or the uneven distribution of fresh meat. The debate often circles around scurvy as well, that slow and miserable illness tied to lack of fresh foods and vitamin C, though 19th century understanding of prevention varied and was sometimes confused. Fresh meat, including game or sea mammals when obtained, could be crucial, and some expeditions benefited greatly from local hunting knowledge. Yet preserved naval rations remained central for many crews. A tin can might promise safety, but a diet built from cans, salt, and hope can still fail the body in ways that appear quietly at first. Before sleeping, the body asks for enough fuel to keep the blood moving warmly through the night. Men who have hauled sledges across rough ice may need huge meals, far beyond what a comfortable person would consider normal. The work is brutal. The cold raises demands. Every step costs. Every shiver costs. If the ration is too small, sleep becomes shallow and chilled. Hunger wakes you. It gnaws under the ribs and makes the blankets seem thinner. A hungry person is also more irritable, and in a small shelter, irritability spreads faster than spilled lamp oil. Cooking itself is work. Snow must be melted for water, and that takes fuel. Meat must be thawed or softened. Biscuit must be broken. Pots must be handled with mittens or stiff fingers. In a tent, the cooking place is cramped and smoky. On a ship, the galley may offer more order, but supplies are still rationed, guarded, and counted. The cook becomes an important figure, part craftsman, part magician, part target for everyone's disappointment. A man who can turn dull ingredients into something warm and tolerable is not merely feeding people, he is maintaining civilization with a spoon. You smell salt, meat, grease, tea leaves, smoke, and damp wool mingling in the shelter. The scent is not fine dining, unless the restaurant theme is heroic inconvenience. Still, your stomach responds. Warm food changes the mood, conversation softens, complaints become more decorative than desperate. Someone makes a joke about the biscuit being suitable for building a church. Someone else says the church would be warmer than the tent. A third man asks whether the biscuit can be appointed captain, since it is clearly the hardest thing present. The laughter is small, but it warms a corner of the night that no stove can reach. You finish slowly, not wasting crumbs. Food is measured against distance, weather, and time. A little fat left in a pot matters. A spilled ration is a tragedy with a spoon in it. You lick, scrape, fold, save, and pack. The modern habit of leaving food because you are not in the mood would seem absurd here. Mood is not on the ration list. You eat what keeps you alive, and you are grateful in the blunt, tired way that comes when gratitude has frost on its eyelashes. As sleep approaches, the food settles inside you like a banked coal. Not blazing, not dramatic, but steady. Your hands are less stiff from holding the mug. Your belly is warm enough to calm the rest of the body. The taste of tea lingers. The smell of fat clings to your gloves. Outside, the night remains enormous and indifferent, but inside your body there is labour beginning, quiet and faithful. The meal becomes warmth, and the warmth becomes patience, and patience becomes the fragile bridge into sleep. You step away from the heavier shelter of the ship and enter the smaller world of the sledging camp, where every night begins with labour. Sleep is no longer waiting in a bunk, however narrow or stale. Sleep must be built from poles, canvas, skins, snow, rope, muscle, and patience. The sledge rests nearby, its runners scratched by rough ice, its load lashed down with the seriousness of a bank vault. Dogs may curl in the snow beyond the camp, or men may stand bent and weary after hauling the load themselves. Either way, bedtime has arrived wearing boots and carrying a shovel. The first task is choosing the place. You look for ground that is not too broken, not too exposed, not too likely to shift, crack, flood, drift, or punish you in some creative new way. On sea ice, flatness can be deceptive. Pressure ridges rise like frozen ruins. Leads may open in the ice, dark water breathing through the white surface. Snow may conceal uneven slabs. A mainstream historical fact settles under your feet. 19th century Arctic sledging parties often travelled away from their ships for surveying, hunting, rescue attempts, or exploration, carrying tents, bedding, food, instruments, and fuel across the ice by sledge. In paintings, this looks heroic. In practice, it is mostly dragging your bedroom across a broken freezer. You propose the surface, stamp carefully, and listen. Sound matters. A hollow note beneath the snow can make the body hesitate. Ice is not simply floor. It is a moving, cracking, floating country with moods. You choose a spot near a low ridge if it offers shelter from wind, but not so near that drifting snow will bury the tent too deeply. You consider where the morning sun would be, if there is sun, which is a charming theory in the polar night. You face the entrance away from the wind if possible. The word possible does heavy work here. Then the digging begins. You clear snow for the tent floor, scrape a level patch, and build a low wall or bank where the wind is strongest. The shovel bites into crust with a dull crunch. Your shoulders ache, your breath thickens. You are tired enough to hate the snow for needing to be arranged before it can help you. Snow is everywhere. Yet somehow, the useful snow is never exactly where you want it. This is typical of free materials. They arrive without customer service. The sledge is unloaded in a careful order. Bedding cannot be thrown anywhere. Food must be guarded. Fuel must be reachable. Instruments must not be crushed or lost. Tent poles come out. Canvas stiff with cold resists unfolding. Guy lines tangle and freeze into little ropes of stubbornness. You kneel with mittens on, then pull one mitten off for a knot, then instantly regret having hands. The wind notices bare fingers at once. It has been waiting all day for this promotion. Dogs, when present, add another layer of life to the camp. They may be harnessed, fed, staked, or allowed to curl in snowy hollows depending on practice and conditions. Their bodies understand cold in ways yours does not. A dog can tuck nose beneath tail and become a compact engine of sleep. You envy this deeply. You also know dogs are not decorative. They are workers, companions, alarms, and occasionally thieves with fur. A bit of meat left unwatched may vanish into a dog with the innocent expression of a bishop. This is why sledging camps require both affection and suspicion. Historians still argue whether man-hauling reflected necessity, naval culture, poor planning, or a reluctance among some British expeditions to rely fully on dogs and indigenous methods. Some expeditions used dogs effectively, while others persisted in making men drag loads over terrible surfaces, partly because supplies, training, and attitudes varied so widely. From inside your tired body, the debate is not abstract. If you have hauled the sledge yourself, sleep begins in the shoulders before it reaches the eyes. Every muscle is humming. Your hands remember the rope. Your hips remember the harness. Your knees have become elderly overnight and would like a formal apology. Once the tent stands, you secure it as if the wind is already planning an appeal. Snow is packed along the edges. The sledge may be positioned as a windbreak. Loose gear is brought inside or tied down. Nothing can be trusted to remain where placed. A mitten lost in drifting snow is not merely misplaced. It is a small disaster with fingers inside it. A cup, spoon, or knife dropped at dusk may be gone until thaw, which is the Arctic's version of keeping a souvenir. A quirky titbit settles near the runners. Sledges themselves sometimes served as part of the sleeping arrangement, used as windbreaks, platforms, anchors, storage walls, or even emergency shelter components. Your transportation becomes furniture. Your furniture becomes a barricade. Your barricade becomes the thing you trip over while half asleep. This is efficient, if efficiency includes bruising your shin on the only object keeping the tent from joining the weather. Cooking follows camp making, and it is slow because snow must become water and food must become edible. The little stove or lamp works in the cramped shelter while bodies crowd around. Steam rises, then freezes somewhere inconvenient. You eat with the heavy silence of people too tired for long conversation. Every chew feels like maintenance. Every sip of warm drink is a message to the body that the day's cruelty has paused, not ended, but paused. The dogs may bark or whine outside. The ice may crack in the distance. Someone may crawl to the entrance to check a line, letting in a blade of air that causes everyone to think uncharitable thoughts. The bedding is unrolled last, or nearly last, because it must stay dry. Skins and bags are shaken free of snow. Spare clothing is placed where it can insulate the floor. Boots are arranged so they can be found. Wet things are identified with gloomy honesty. You slide into the sleeping place carefully, making sure the foot end is not pressed against an icy wall of canvas. The tent is so low that sitting upright may bend your neck. Lying down is not simply restful, it is the only posture the architecture approves. Outside, the camp shrinks to a few shapes: sledges, dog forms, snow wall, tent mound, perhaps a dark line where ice opens far away. Inside, you hear breath, fabric, and the faint settling of snow against the edges. The day's movement remains inside you, still pulling, still grinding, still asking why anyone thought the map needed more information. Yet the little camp holds. You have dragged shelter into emptiness and persuaded it to stand. You have made a bed where there was only ice. It is a ridiculous achievement, and a real one. Wrapped in the narrow warmth of the sledging tent, you let the labour drain slowly from your limbs while the sledge waits outside, ready to become tomorrow's burden again. You begin to notice, with the slow embarrassment of a person learning obvious things late, that the people who already live in the Arctic are not improvising. Their clothing, houses, lamps, sledges, tools, and sleeping habits are not charming curiosities scattered around the edge of European adventure. They are systems. They are answers. They are the result of generations watching wind, snow, animals, ice, hunger, and darkness with the seriousness of people who cannot leave when the weather becomes rude. You look down at your own stiff garments, your awkward bedding, your damp cuffs, and the thought arrives softly. Perhaps the Arctic had teachers long before it had explorers. Inuit communities across the Arctic developed highly effective ways to sleep in severe cold, especially through clothing made from animal skins. Snow houses shaped with skill, sleeping platforms, shared family warmth, and lamps that provided heat and light. A mainstream historical fact settles into the glow of the lamp. 19th-century European and American explorers often survived, travelled, or improved their methods by borrowing, trading for, or learning from Inuit knowledge, even when they did not always give that knowledge the respect it deserved. Some learned gratefully. Some learned reluctantly. Some seemed to learn only after their own equipment had failed in ways so dramatic that even pride needed a blanket. You step into a snow house, or imagine one carefully built, and the difference is immediate. Outside, the wind claws across open ice. Inside, the air is still. The walls are pale, curved, and quiet. Snow blocks do not warm the space by magic, they insulate by trapping air and stopping wind. A raised sleeping platform allows colder air to sink lower while people rest slightly above it. Skins spread across the platform make a layered bed. Bodies gather together. A lamp burns steadily. The whole place is low, compact, and shaped around actual conditions rather than around the memory of rooms back home. It is less like camping and more like entering a small, frozen instrument tuned to human survival. You notice the entrance tunnel dipping low, a clever arrangement that helps trap colder air away from the sleeping area. Warm air rises and remains where the bodies are. This is the sort of detail that feels simple only after someone else has perfected it. You could have stared at snow for a month and still made a drafty little lump with a doorway in the wrong place. The snow house does not boast, it simply works, which is deeply annoying if you have been wrestling canvas into obedience while calling it progress. Clothing teaches the same lesson. Inuit skin garments, often made from caribou, seal, or other animals depending on place and purpose, are light, warm, and carefully cut. Caribou hair, with its hollow structure, traps air beautifully. Parkas with hoods create a protected microclimate around the head and face. Mittens, boots, and layered skin clothing can manage both warmth and movement. Fur can be worn facing inward or outward depending on need. A sleeping body wrapped in such clothing is not merely covered, it is housed. You begin to understand that a good hood may be as important as a good wall, and that a boot shaped by experience may be worth more than an entire crate of official confidence. Historians still argue whether European explorers resisted Inuit methods mostly because of imperial attitudes, naval discipline, religious and cultural prejudice, practical supply limits, or the difficulty of learning skilled techniques quickly. The answer is not tidy. Some expedition members admired Inuit tools and clothing, others dismissed them as primitive, while quietly adopting the parts that worked. Some depended on Inuit guides, hunters, seamstresses, interpreters and traders. Others failed because they did not understand the land, the food, the travel routes, or the seasonal rhythms. Pride is a poor insulator. Unfortunately, it packs easily and weighs nothing, so people bring a lot of it. You watch the making of a sleeping place and realize how much labor hides inside comfort. Skins must be obtained, scraped, softened, sewn, dried, repaired, and kept usable. Snow blocks must be cut with knowledge of texture and wind. Lamps require fuel and wicks. Boots need liners and careful drying. Sleeping warm is not a single trick. It is a household economy. It is hunting, sewing, building, sharing, observing, and remembering. A European expedition might admire a finished fur garment without seeing the patient hands that made every seam matter. That is like praising a warm loaf while forgetting agriculture, milling, fire, and the person who woke early. Very heroic of the loaf, naturally. A quirky titbit rests near the lamp flame. A traditional snow house could become warm enough inside that the inner wall surface might soften slightly, then refreeze into a thin glaze, making the structure stronger and smoother when managed properly. Imagine living in a house that improves after breathing in it, while your tent improves only if everyone stops touching the ceiling. The snow house is not crude, it is elegant physics wearing white. Food knowledge matters as much as bedding, fresh meat, fat, organ meats. Fish and sea mammals could sustain people in ways preserved ship stores often could not. Many outsiders struggled with Arctic diet because they brought assumptions from elsewhere. They valued bread, tea, salt, meat, and tinned goods, while local food systems followed the animals and seasons. Sleep in the cold depends on what was eaten, and what was eaten depends on knowing where life moves beneath or across the ice. A full stomach of the right food can be a blanket from within. A ration chosen by committee far away can become a polite disaster in a can. You also notice the social arrangement of warmth. Families and groups sleeping together in compact spaces preserve heat. Clothing may be loosened or arranged in ways that vent moisture. Boots may be handled according to long practice. Children learn early how not to waste heat, how to read weather, how to respect tools. Knowledge passes not as a dramatic lecture but as ordinary life. A child watching where a mitten is placed may be learning survival. Meanwhile, an explorer writes in a journal that the natives possess remarkable habits, which is a very formal way of saying they know what they are doing and we are lucky they are patient. You settle into the sleeping platform. or into the thought of it, feeling how still air changes everything. The cold remains outside, but it has been organised. It has been guided around the body instead of invited directly to the skin. Your bedding is not fighting alone. The house, lamp, clothing, food, and people work together. That is the deeper lesson. Warmth is communal. Warmth is designed. Warmth is knowledge carried in stitches, snow blocks, oil flames, and shared habits. The night feels different when shaped by people who understand it. Not safe in the lazy sense. Not easy. The Arctic is still the Arctic, with its huge dark, its sudden weather, its hunger, its pressure, its long silences. But inside the rounded shelter, with skins below and a lamp breathing steadily, sleep no longer feels like a desperate argument. It feels like a practice, old and careful, learned through years of attention. You lie still, humbled beneath the pale curve of snow, while warmth gathers not from conquest, but from listening. You wake without knowing whether it is morning, because the sky has stopped offering useful opinions. The polar night stretches so long that time begins to feel less like a road, and more like a room you cannot leave. Lamps mark hours, bells mark duties, meals mark the body's expectations. Sleep no longer follows sunset, because sunset has become an event from another lifetime. You learn to sleep by schedule, by command, by fatigue, and sometimes by surrender. The darkness outside is not merely dark. It is continuous, patient, and oddly heavy, as if someone has laid a black blanket across the world and forgotten to fold it back. Routine becomes the frame that holds everyone together. You rise when told, eat when food is served, work when duties begin, exercise when ordered, and sleep when the day's arrangement says sleep is sensible. A mainstream historical fact settles into the rhythm of the ship or camp. Many 19th century Arctic expeditions organised winter routines with set watches, meals, exercise, scientific observations, reading, school lessons, worship, or entertainments to preserve discipline and morale during months of darkness and confinement. This is not busy work, although it may feel like it when you are sweeping a deck that is functionally inside a frozen planet. Routine is a way of telling the mind, kindly but firmly, that the world still has edges. Sleep depends on that structure. Without routine, bodies drift. Some men become restless. Others become dull and sleepy at strange hours. The absence of natural light confuses the senses. Your mind asks whether it should be alert or drowsy, and the darkness answers yes. Lamps try to replace the sun, but they cannot fill the sky. Their glow is small, yellow, and smoky, gathering in corners and leaving shadows thick behind beams and hanging clothes. You may lie down because the clock insists, while your thoughts wander awake. Or you may fight sleep during duty, eyelids heavy as soaked wool, while the night outside looks exactly as it did hours earlier. The polar dark is terrible at variety. It has one outfit and wears it constantly. Morale becomes part of bedding, though no quartermaster lists it that way. A warm bag helps the body. A steady mind helps the body stay in it. Fear, boredom, homesickness, and irritation can make sleep thin. You lie in your bunk or bag and think of home, not in grand sentimental scenes at first, but in small details. A door latch, a cup on a table, the smell of bread, the outrageous luxury of walking to bed without calculating whether your breath will freeze above your face. Memory can comfort you, but it can also sharpen the distance. Homesickness is warm and cold at the same time, which is frankly unhelpful. So the expedition creates distractions. Men read aloud. They stage little plays. They write mock newspapers. They celebrate holidays with whatever decoration and food can be managed. They attend lectures about science, geography, navigation, or anything that can make the mind sit still without staring into the dark. A quirky tidbit settles into the lamplight. Some Arctic crews produced handwritten newspapers or magazines during winter quarters, full of jokes, poems, reports, and teasing notices, making a tiny publishing world inside the ice. Imagine nearly freezing for months and still having an editorial deadline. Humanity is ridiculous, but sometimes ridiculousness is exactly what keeps it breathing. Exercise also matters. Men may be ordered to walk on deck, drill, haul, dance, or move in circles under shelter, partly to keep health and partly to tire the body enough for sleep. The irony is delicious in a dry, frost-covered way. You are exhausted by survival, yet you still need organised exercise because confinement makes the body stale. A man can be tired and underused at the same time. Muscles ache from cold and labour, then grow restless from too much sitting below decks. Sleep improves when the body has worked properly, not merely endured. The Arctic makes even fatigue complicated. Very considerate of it to add paperwork to weariness. Historians still argue whether depression and winter melancholy on polar expeditions were caused more by darkness, diet, isolation, cramped living, fear of failure, illness, or the rigid cultures of command that shaped how men expressed suffering. Many journals describe gloom indirectly through irritability, silence, poor sleep, strange dreams, and longing for daylight. Men did not always have language that welcomed emotional confession. A sailor might say the weather was tedious when he meant his heart felt like a locked chest. An officer might praise discipline while quietly measuring how thin everyone's patience had become. The cold is visible. Despair is better at hiding under blankets. You settle into your sleeping place after an evening of controlled sociability. Perhaps someone has read from a book. Perhaps prayers have been said. Perhaps a joke has gone around about a Russian, a boot, or a man's heroic battle with a frozen spoon. 3 minutes of laughter can soften 3 hours of darkness. The mind needs little lamps too. You carry that laughter into the bedding, where it flickers briefly while the air cools around your face. The body learns artificial signals. A certain bell means ending work. A certain meal means sleep is approaching. A certain dimming of lamps means voices must lower. You begin to feel drowsy when the ritual begins, even if the sky has not changed. This is how humans survive the sun's absence. They invent smaller suns made of habit. Tea at the same hour, a pipe for those who smoke, a page read aloud, a hymn, a joke, a final check of boots. The sequence becomes a lullaby for grown men who would deny needing one, while absolutely needing one. Yet silence can still open too wide. Lying awake, you hear the pressure of ice, the creak of timbers, the flap of canvas, the breath of sleepers, the occasional cough that travels through the room like a messenger. Your thoughts wander toward the unknown distance. How far to open water? How far to home? How far to spring? The numbers do not help. Counting days can soothe or wound, depending on the answer. You learn not to look too far ahead. Sleep belongs to the next few hours only. Survive the night, then breakfast, then duty, then another carefully lit pocket of time. You pull the bedding closer and let routine hold you where confidence cannot. The darkness remains outside, immense and unblinking. Inside, human beings have made a clockwork of meals, chores, stories, lamps, and rest. It is fragile, slightly absurd, and surprisingly strong. You breathe slowly, listening as the shelter settles into its appointed quiet. Somewhere in the dark, spring exists as a fact not yet visible. For now, the schedule is your horizon, and the narrow warmth around you is enough to invite sleep back into the long night. You drift towards sleep with the body of a person who has been asked to endure too much weather. Rest does not always arrive cleanly. It comes tangled with aches, old bruises, sore gums, stiff joints, hunger, damp wool, and dreams that wander into strange places. The Arctic night is quiet enough for the mind to hear itself too clearly. Every discomfort grows a voice A tooth throbs like a tiny drum. A knee complains about the day's hauling. A shoulder remembers a fall on the ice and submits its report at length. You lie there, wrapped carefully, and discover that sleep in the cold is not only about warmth. It is also about illness, imagination, and the odd little customs people invent when the world has become too narrow. Sickness changes everything about sleeping. A healthy man can make heat, recover from cold, and bear discomfort with some dignity, or at least with entertaining levels of grumbling. A sick man struggles. Fever makes bedding feel too hot, then too cold. Weakness makes boots harder to remove, clothing harder to adjust, and night watches more punishing. Coughs travel through crowded quarters. Stomach troubles make the distance to a latrine or head feel like an expedition within the expedition, which is not the kind of adventure anyone requested. The Arctic is quite generous with unwanted side quests. Scurvy haunts many 19th century voyages, especially when fresh food is scarce and preservation knowledge fails the body. A mainstream historical fact settles heavily into the berth. Scurvy, caused by lack of vitamin C, affected numerous long sea voyages and polar expeditions, producing weakness, swollen gums, joint pain, poor wound healing, and deep fatigue. For a sleeper, this means the body cannot simply relax. It aches in layers. Turning over hurts. Chewing dinner has hurt. Standing watch has hurt. Now lying still hurts too. Which feels like an administrative error in the design of rest. Men may try to hide illness, partly from pride, partly from fear of burdening others, partly because admitting weakness in a disciplined expedition can feel dangerous. Yet illness announces itself in the night. A man who cannot sleep shifts too often. A man with painful legs breathes differently. A man troubled by gums or old wounds may make small, involuntary sounds. In close quarters, suffering becomes communal, even when unspoken. Everyone hears. Everyone knows. No one has much spare comfort to give. But sometimes a shared mug, an adjusted blanket, or a word in the dark becomes enough. Historians still argue whether poor nutrition, spoiled preserved food, lead contamination from some tinned provisions, exhaustion, or command decisions played the larger role in weakening certain polar crews. The debate is complicated because suffering rarely has one cause. A man might be cold because his clothes are damp, damp because he worked too hard, weak because he has eaten poorly, sleepless because he is anxious, and anxious because the ship has not moved in months. The Arctic piles causes like snowdrifts. By the time someone asks what went wrong, the answer may be buried under everything. Dreams in polar winter can become vivid. Darkness stretches the mind. Monotony makes memory bright. You may dream of green fields with almost painful detail, or of streets, hearths, voices, bread, rain, horses, church bells. The ordinary world arriving in bright fragments. Then you wake to the same dim boards, the same frozen canvas, the same breath smoking in the air. The contrast can hurt. A dream of warmth may comfort you while it lasts, then leave the cold feeling personally insulting. Your mind has taken you home for 5 minutes and charged you on return. At other times, dreams turn strange. The creak of ice becomes a voice. The flap of canvas becomes footsteps. A sleeping man's cough becomes a warning. Exhaustion blurs waking and dreaming, especially during long darkness. You may hear your name. Open your eyes and find only shadows. You may believe someone is standing near the entrance, then realize it is a hanging coat. A quirky tidbit drifts through the berth like a half-dream. Polar journals sometimes mention strange sounds, odd impressions, powerful dreams, or moods sharpened by darkness and isolation, reminding you that the mind, when deprived of variety, begins producing its own theatre. Very efficient, really. The expedition saves on scenery because your brain supplies the ghosts. Cabin fever is not a formal diagnosis in the way a surgeon's list might prefer, but the experience is real enough. Confined people grow irritable over trifles. A misplaced spoon becomes an event. A repeated phrase becomes intolerable. A man's habit of clearing his throat may develop into a moral crisis for everyone within hearing. Sleep suffers when tempers simmer. You lie there replaying a remark from supper that would mean nothing in summer, but now feels like an insult engraved on a glacier. The mind wants novelty, privacy, and daylight. It receives biscuit, elbows, and mister. Thompson breathing oddly through his nose. Civilization is fragile, especially near bedtime. To manage the strangeness, men invent traditions. Holidays are kept with ceremony. Birthdays are marked. Toasts are made with whatever can be spared. Games are played. Songs are sung. Roles are assigned for little performances. A man may become the ship's comic writer, another the lecturer, another the person everyone trusts to make tea properly. These roles matter. They give shape to identity when the ice has reduced life to chores and waiting. At night, after the laughter has faded, the memory of these customs helps soften the dark. You are not only a cold body in bedding. You are part of a small society, stubbornly pretending that manners, jokes, and schedules can hold back the void. Strangely, they can help. Doctors and surgeons on expeditions do what they can. They inspect, prescribe, record symptoms, distribute remedies, and sometimes order changes in diet or routine. But medicine in the 19th century has limits, and polar conditions expose them cruelly. Pain relievers, tonics, preserved lemon juice, lime juice, soups, fresh meat when available, rest, and warmth may all be used or attempted. Some treatments help, some do little. Some are based on theories later abandoned. From the sickbed, medical history feels less like progress and more like someone standing over you with a bottle and a confident expression. Confidence, sadly, is not always medicinal. Night sounds become part of the illness world. A cough from one corner, a groan from another, the scrape of a cup, the careful footstep of someone checking on a patient. On a ship, the surgeon may pass between hammocks with a lamp, briefly lighting faces drawn by cold and poor sleep. In a tent, there is less room for ceremony. A sick man lies beside companions who must rise and travel again. Concern meets necessity. If the party stays, supplies shrink. If the party moves, the sick suffer. The Arctic is talented at offering choices that all look rude. You settle deeper, feeling your own body's inventory. Not feverish, not too numb. Hungry, perhaps. Sore, certainly. Tired beyond ordinary tiredness. Your dreams gather at the edge again, full of warm kitchens, impossible sunlight, and maybe a dog that speaks in the voice of the captain, which is not ideal but could be worse. You breathe slowly and let the sounds around you blur. Someone turns over. Someone whispers. Somewhere the ice cracks, and the ship or tent answers. Sleep finally comes as a patchy mercy. It does not fix illness, fear, or longing, but it lowers their volume for a while. Beneath blankets, skins, smoke, and frost, the mind floats away from the aching body. The Arctic remains outside and inside, pressing at joints and dreams alike. Yet for a few hours you are released into softer darkness. Not safe, not cured, not free, but carried. You wake because the cold has found a new way to introduce itself. It is not dramatic. It does not roar. It simply rests against your cheek, sharp and patient, until the mind climbs out of sleep and remembers where the body has been left. For a few seconds, you do not move. You listen. The shelter is quiet except for breathing, a faint creak, a distant crack in the ice, and the tiny whisper of frost shifting overhead. Your bedding holds a little warmth around you, a private hollow made during the night by breath, calories, wool, skin, and stubborn circulation. Outside that hollow waits the morning, although morning is sometimes only a decision made by clocks. The first rule is not to rush. Sudden movement opens the bedding and spills warmth into the air. You flex your toes under cover. You curl your fingers. You test the nose, the ears, the cheeks. Everything reports back slowly, like a crew of sleepy clerks. The feet are cold but present. The hands are stiff but obedient. Your face feels dry in some places and frosted in others. This is acceptable. Acceptable is not glorious, but it is a fine Arctic word. You have woken with the same number of small body parts you meant to keep, which is a very respectable start. Your breath has decorated the sleeping place during the night. Frost feathers the rim of the bag, the edge of the blanket, perhaps the tent roof or the beams above your bunk. If you are in a tent, the canvas may be stiff and pale, with crystals clinging where warm air met the frozen wall. If you are aboard ship, nearby wood or hanging cloth may carry beads of ice. A mainstream historical fact settles into the pale morning dimness. Explorers regularly had to deal with frost formed from breath and condensation inside shelters, because even successful sleeping systems could not prevent moisture from freezing in extreme cold. Your own lungs have become interior decorators. Unfortunately, their chosen theme is uncomfortable sparkle. You begin the slow exit from warmth. This is the cruelest part of sleeping in the Arctic. Getting into bedding is difficult, but getting out requires moral courage and possibly a small personal speech. You loosen the flap or blanket edge just enough to reach for clothing that has been kept close. A sleeve, a cap, a mitten liner, a sock. Anything needed first must be found without letting too much cold air pour in. If a garment was left too far away, it may be frozen into a shape that suggests it has no interest in friendship. You pull it near and warm it by degrees. Because dressing in cold clothing feels like being hugged by a snowman with poor boundaries. Boots are the great morning trial. Even when carefully managed, they may be stiff, icy, or reluctant. You work your feet into them with patience and private resentment. A boot that froze overnight can seem smaller, harder, and personally offended. If inner socks have stayed warm under your clothing, you give thanks to whatever humble wisdom placed them there. If not, you negotiate with misery. You do not stamp too hard too soon. You do not force numb feet carelessly. You ease, tug, flex, and breathe through the process. Somewhere nearby, another man is doing the same, making small sounds that are half effort and half philosophy. Historians still argue whether the daily act of rising in polar conditions reveals more about physical endurance, disciplined habit, social pressure, or the simple power of not wanting to disappoint the group. It is probably all of these. A person alone might stay under the blankets longer, bargaining with the cold. In company, movement becomes contagious. One man rises, then another. Someone jokes in a dead voice that the weather appears refreshing. Someone else says refreshing is what people call suffering when they lack imagination. A third man coughs and asks whether breakfast has decided to exist. The day begins not with triumph, but with sarcasm and frozen leather. The bedding must be handled before the camp or ship can fully stir. Sleeping bags and blankets are shaken, brushed, turned, or hung where possible. Frost must be removed before it melts into dampness. This chore feels rude, because your bed has helped you survive and now needs immediate maintenance like a needy aristocrat. You beat the fur or cloth lightly, watching crystals scatter into the dim air. In open camp, the movement sends little glittering clouds across the snow. On ship, frost drops to the boards or is swept away. You are not tidying for elegance. You are protecting tomorrow night's warmth. A quirky tidbit appears in the morning labour. Some explorers found that bedding could become heavier over time from accumulated frost, especially during sledging journeys, so keeping it aired and cleared was not optional, but part of survival. Imagine dragging your bed all day and discovering it has gained weight because you breathed too honestly. The Arctic has a talent for turning basic biology into luggage. Food follows, if supplies and routine allow. A hot drink, a ration of biscuit, A piece of preserved meat, porridge, soup, or pemmican begins to coax the body from night mode into work mode. Fingers wrap around a mug. Steam rises and becomes both comfort and future frost. The first swallow is almost tender. It tells your stomach that the body is not abandoned. It tells the mind that the day has a sequence, and sequences are reassuring. Warmth inside, clothing outside, movement next. This is how you become functional. Not cheerfully, but adequately. Adequately is another useful Arctic word, far more honest than splendid. Then comes the leaving. If you are in a tent, the entrance must be opened, often from behind a drift or crust of snow. You push outward, and the world arrives in a blade of brightness or darkness, depending on season and hour. Wind touches your face at once. The protected smell of bedding, bodies, and smoke gives way to the clean, empty smell of ice. The camp appears in fragments, sledges half buried, dogs curled or stirring, snow walls rounded by drift, footprints softened, horizon blurred. If you are aboard ship, you climb toward deck through stale warmth into biting air, and the frozen rigging stands overhead like black lines drawn on a pale sky. The body resists. Every sensible part of you suggests returning to the bedding and forming a permanent treaty with the blankets. But duty has already begun. Someone must check the ice. Someone must tend animals. Someone must fetch snow for water. Someone must observe the weather, repair gear, prepare travel, clean quarters, record readings, cook, haul, or stand watch. Exploration is often described as discovery, but most mornings it looks like chores performed in hostile temperatures. If this were a holiday, the brochure would be very carefully sewed. You take the first steps away from the sleeping place. Snow squeaks. Clothing creaks. The cold bites through gaps not yet sealed by movement. Breath blooms and vanishes. Behind you, the bed is no longer a refuge but equipment awaiting care. Ahead lies the day. White, dark, or dim blue, depending on the season, but always demanding. You carry the night's lessons in your body. Stay dry. Protect the edges. Eat enough. Trust warmth slowly made. Respect shelter. Learn from those who know the land. And never underestimate a sock. And still, there is courage in this ordinary rising. Not the loud kind carved into statues, but the smaller kind that puts on frozen boots. The kind that crawls out from a warm hollow because others are doing the same. The kind that meets the cold without pretending it is pleasant. You stand under the huge Arctic sky, wrapped in layers, smelling of smoke and wool, tired already, alive again. The place where you slept remains behind you, marked by frost, crushed snow, and the faint shape of human warmth that survived the night. The day widens, but gently now, as if the ice itself has lowered its voice. You breathe more slowly. The hard edges of the camp soften in your mind. The frozen boots, the stiff canvas, the glitter of frost on bedding, all of it begins to drift away from effort into memory. You do not need to pull the sledge now. You do not need to check every knot, every mitten, every small ache. The wind falls back into a hush. The snow becomes less a burden and more a pale blanket spread across the sleeping world. You imagine the explorers settling once more into their narrow pockets of warmth, each person folded carefully against the cold, each breath rising and fading. The lamp dims, the ship creaks softly in the ice, the tent wall gives one last sleepy flutter. Far overhead, stars hold still in the dark, calm and distant, asking nothing. Even the great frozen sea seems to rest, its cracks and groans sinking into a slower rhythm. Here, in the quiet, every small comfort is enough. A dry sock, a warm cup, a shoulder nearby, a blanket drawn under the chin. The body remembers how to make a little warmth and keep it close. The mind remembers that night can be crossed one breath at a time, so you can let the cold stay far away now, outside the walls of the story. You are warm where you are. You are safe in the soft dark. The old Arctic night stretches out, silver and blue and peaceful, while the last glow of the lamp fades to a tiny amber point, then to a whisper, then to nothing at all. End of script. Sweet dreams.